All right, new chapter. We're going to be in rational expressions this time. So this is 711. We're going to be simplifying rational expressions. So we're going to understand the restrictions of a rational expression and simplify the different types of expressions. Now, you have simplified a rational expression before. You have looked at like 20 over 60 and you thought to yourself, okay, well, what is a number that the top and the bottom is going to reduce? And so you sat there and you're like, okay, 20 over 60, okay, I can divide the top by 10, and I can divide the bottom by 10, okay, so I'm going to get 2 over 6, and then, I can divide the top by 2 and the bottom by 2, and you're going to get 1 over 3. Now, that is a great shortcut, but the reality is it's missing the heart of what you're actually doing. And the only time you can actually reduce is if you're reducing factors, and they have to be common factors, like the same factor on the top and the bottom. Now, what is a factor? A factor means multiplication. So if it's not being multiplied, you can't reduce it. So technically, this 20 over 60, I need to break that up into 10 times 2, and on the bottom, I can break that up into 10 times 2 times 3, right? So 3 times 2 is 6, 6 times 10 is 60, and now the same factors reduce, and so that's the reason why I have 1 over 3. You can only reduce that way. Now, the reason why I'm doing that, and you're going to see that in the next slide, is it's going to help us identify how to reduce. Now, as we simplify, right, I can look at this and be like, oh, this is 10 times x. This is 10 times x. Okay, well, the same factor is 10, and the same factor is x. Those are going to reduce. But there are restrictions. If you remember our domain, we talked about like domain, how you can't divide by 0. Well, what if x is 0? Okay, you're going to be dividing by 0. So we have to just put a little thing we're saying x can't equal 0, and we have to attach that to it. Now, as a hint, or just as a reminder, to find those values, you just set whatever that value is equal to 0, and you say that it can't equal that. All right, so let's look at a few examples of us simplifying. Okay, we have to check to make sure they're factors. Okay, well, this is h times k over h. They are factors, therefore I can reduce. Now, after we reduce, okay, I have to take those values in the denominator. I have to set it equal to 0, and I say it can't equal that. H is by itself, and so that's the value that needs to be excluded. H can't be 0. Now, for this next one, I have to, are they factors? The answer is yes, because it's 2m minus 5 times m plus 6, and then m plus 6 times 3m plus 1. So then now we can reduce those, and so I'm going to get 2m minus 5 over 3m plus 1. But now we look at the original, and I have to find those excluded values. So I have to set this equal to 0 and say it can't equal that. I have to set this equal to 0 and say it can't equal that. And so subtract 6, m cannot equal negative 6. Subtract 1, divide by 3, m cannot equal negative 1/3. Now, for this one over here, it's not a factor just yet because of that minus, but we have to put parentheses around the entire thing. Now I can look at that and be like, oh, this is the same. So now I can reduce them. And so I'm going to get 1 over 4x minus 1. And then in the denominator, we have set that equal to 0, so x cannot equal 1 over 4. And if I set this equal to 0, I'll do that one out because it's a little. So add 2x and then divide by 2. So those are my exclusions. Now, what happens if we get a value like this where it's not factored? You're going to have to factor it first, because these pluses and this minus here, it actually means there are no factors. So we need to factor it first. So this is where this is a trinomial quadratic, a times c. Okay, 9. Factors of 9 to add to 6. 3 and 3. Break it apart, right? Remember that whole... We've been doing this all year. Now to skip some steps, just because I'm trying to save some time. Now they are factored. It's being multiplied. Now there's potential for things to reduce. This x squared minus 9, that's a difference of squares. That's x plus 3 and x minus 3. So now what reduces is going to be that. So here's my reduced answer. Now set it equal to 0. Add 9. Square root. X can't equal plus or minus 3. Or you can look at this and set each one of those equal to 0. Now same thing here. Because of this plus, because of that plus, they aren't factors. They're not going to reduce. So now I need to factor it. Okay, it's not a trinomial, but I have to look at what's in common. So what's in common is going to be x. Bottom here, what's in common is going to be 2. So now those are the same. So I'm left with that. But now my exclusion, setting that equal to 0. X can't equal negative 4. So in conclusion, what did we learn today? We learned how to simplify rational expressions. Now remember, they have to be factors. So you may have to factor it first. That's a big, important thing, is they have to be factors. Now how do we find the excluded values? You set the denominator equal to 0. You say it can't equal that, and then you solve. This does conclude our lesson. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments.